This video will contain spoilers from the world and story of Portal and Portal 2. Please beware. Now, let's be honest here, the world of Portal can sometimes be a pretty lonely place. Especially considering that chances are you are one of the last humans remaining in the facility, and in the second game, perhaps even in the world. I mean, who knows at this point. So, every time you get a piece of human interaction, it feels pretty special and makes you remember the moment. Well, one of the people, or I suppose the recordings of a person that you get to interact with the most would of course be Cave Johnson, someone you are very familiar with, especially if you've played Portal 2. And well, he will be the topic of today's video. I'll be telling you everything we know about this man, a little bit of history since the beginnings in the Aperture fixtures all the way to Aperture laboratories much later. At the end, I will also mention a little bit of trivia and stuff that you may not have known about this character from just playing the game. Now before we begin, I do want to say that I will be mainly focusing on the information we can gather from Portal 1 and Portal 2. I know that he plays a more prominent role in the Perpetual Testing Initiative, but considering that that game takes place in a parallel universe, I am just for now going to perceive whatever happens there as mostly not canon. So with that out of the way, get nice and comfy, make sure your teeth aren't turning into gasoline because that's definitely not a part of this test, and let's go. Now first things first, Cave Johnson is basically the eccentric and somewhat crazy original owner and creator of what now became Aperture Science. In games, he appears only very minorly in Portal 1, mostly through Doug Ratman's drawings, with some of them referencing his username and password. However, he is a much more prominent figure in Portal 2 once you reach the old testing areas, as he will most often be heard talking to you through pre-recorded radio messages. The story of Cave Johnson begins somewhere around 1943 when he created Aperture Fixtures. Now originally this company was meant as a shower curtain manufacturer, and it probably wouldn't have been that amazing. However, he managed to sign an amazing contract which basically made him the provider of shower curtains for all branches of the US military except the Navy, which instantly made him into a billionaire, even winning him the 1943 Shower Curtain Salesman of the Year award. Now clearly, having huge amounts of money in his bank account and being slightly insane, at least at the beginning, this guy had to figure out what to do, and he turned himself towards science, well, if you want to call it that. He got in contact with the best of the best and the richest of the rich to get a company together that would be, well, testing and trying to innovate in the field of science in all manner of things. And one of his most dedicated employees that he hired around this time would be the very famous Carolyn, who later became the framework for GLaDOS. Now I think saying that most of his ideas when it came to testing were absolutely insane is a major understatement. They went through everything from trying to dry up people using jet engines to possibly ripping off their skin and sewing it back on. The experiments that happened were definitely not very nice, and slowly but surely the number of willing test subjects who originally started out as best of the best, like astronauts, top scientists, Olympians, the numbers started to kind of dwindle. Fortunately for Cave Johnson and Aperture Science as a whole, it was a bit after this point when they finally developed the famous Aperture Science portable quantum tunneling device, which was effectively the precursor to the much more modern handheld portal device. Now you would think that with a huge breakthrough like this, they would start selling it to the world immediately. However, this is not what Cave Johnson envisioned. Despite being somewhat crazy, he was also an incredible perfectionist, so he tried to keep all the science they had regarding the tunneling device on tabs and develop it all the way to perfection, as he believed that creating portals is not the maximum extent that they could push this technology for. Now, somewhere later in the 1970s, Cave's temper was about to be tested yet again as a competitor started to rise in the field, the famous Black Mesa. Now, Cave Johnson also implies that Black Mesa at some point stole some technology from Aperture and then basically begun producing it commercially before Aperture did it, which definitely didn't help his mental state, which already seemed pretty thin coming up to this, let's be honest. However, it also seemed like his life was getting better from a different angle as Carolyn was becoming a bigger part of his life, and he even made her a full-time secretary, or basically his right hand in this case. Now at this point, the company is really deteriorating. We're talking like the 1980s. The company has been rebranded to Aperture Laboratories, and the number of willing test subjects is basically non-existent, so staff and even people just randomly pulled from the street are being used. Cave Johnson is starting to be pretty desperate to develop something groundbreaking, and during one of his experiments, he decides to purchase a number of what he calls moon rocks. But unfortunately, as it so happens, he seems to contract a lethal disease, or well, illness, from being exposed to this moon dust. The reason why he purchased these is because he was trying to develop something called the conversion gel, which would allow portals to be placed on any surface. As his illness progressed, he repurposed this gel and tried to make it in such a way that it would pull the toxins out of his body, but seemingly it didn't quite work. At this point, you can even hear the messages start to get a bit more desperate as his mental states continues to go down the drain, and this is also the point where he says his famous "when life gives you lemons" line. Now Cave Johnson here is seemingly nearing the end of his rope, so he starts to develop something that would help him preserve himself: artificial intelligence and brain mapping. What he hopes for is effectively that his brain can potentially be mapped into a computer, effectively preserving him even when his biological body, well, effectively dies. However, unfortunately, it seems that this technology is simply not being developed fast enough, and so in the fear that he's going to die before his consciousness can be uploaded, he instead says that Carolyn should be the one to undergo this, as he has come to rely on her as his right hand, and he even states that she was selected simply due to her devotion to the scientific progress. Now, what eventually happened to Cave Johnson? Well, it's not exactly known, though it is presumed that he succumbed to his illness. Is it possible that by some miracle he survived the illness and is still out there? Well, who knows, maybe. However, even if he survived the illness, I think it's unlikely that at this point he would still be alive, especially considering the fact that, based on the portraits we can find in the game and the dates you can find right below them, most people generally assume that Cave Johnson was born somewhere in the early 20s, which would definitely make him pretty old by now. Now, just to finish this off, let's run through some pretty quick trivia here. Originally, in Portal 2, Cave Johnson was actually supposed to be the replacement for Wheatley as your sidekick in a robotic body. However, this was later scrapped and he was put in as more of a guide throughout the facility rather than the chatty, evil robot Wheatley who you have to portal with throughout the game. Interestingly enough, since I mentioned it at the start, I might as well say it, in the Perpetual Testing Initiative, which takes place in a parallel universe, Cave Johnson never died from rock moon poisoning, so he actually does get a few pretty interesting interactions with GLaDOS, which I do recommend you guys check out. And finally, if you're curious where the inspiration for Cave Johnson came, according to Valve, his appearance was inspired by their lead animator, Bill Fletcher. But that is basically everything we know of Cave Johnson as of right now, and since, well, let's be honest, Valve is probably never going to come out with Portal 3, chances are this is where the information is also going to stay. So I hope you guys enjoyed and learned at least something new about the fascinating world of Aperture Science in the Portal games. If you liked this video, maybe consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. All of those would be very much appreciated. And if there's anything that I missed or any theories about Cave Johnson that you would like to cover, make sure to leave those down in the comments as well. I would very much love to read them. Now with that, I'm gonna wish you all a beautiful rest of the day, and I'll see you in whatever next video I make. Bye bye.